The country of Cuba is only 90 miles away from Key West, Florida, but no other country is so close to us, yet so mysterious at the same time. Many of us take for granted the amenities that we have in non-communist countries, and we have more freedom than we like to think. Compared to some places like Cuba, on the other hand, you might not have the freedom to say what's on your mind or do the things as you please. Here are things you're not allowed to do in Cuba.
Hey guys, how's it going? It's your host, American Eye, keeping an eye on everything you want to know. Before we get started, make sure you hit that like button, leave us a comment, and then you can subscribe for more videos every week.
But first, quick shout out goes to Wolfhound Adventure for leaving us this comment in one of our recent videos about treacherous lakes. Stay tuned for today's question for your chance to get featured. Number 11. Freely selling lobster. If you're thinking about opening up your own lobster trapping and restaurant business in Cuba, you might want to think twice about it. The whole lobster industry is strictly run by the government, and they want to make sure that these crustaceans make the most money as possible. In this country, lobster is reserved strictly for the tourism industry, meaning that you likely have to go to a restaurant or a hotel to get some. This ensures that lobsters don't end up in the wrong hands, and that they can make as much money off them as possible. So basically, you can't just go out in the Caribbean Sea and catch as many lobsters as you please. It's considered to be a delicacy, and by imposing some restrictions, it should help keep the lobster population thriving. Number 10. Driving a foreigner in your private car. It doesn't sound like Uber will be coming to Cuba anytime soon, according to this law. In Cuba, if you pick up a foreigner in your private car and you get caught, you could be in some serious trouble. It's one of those weird prohibitions, but maybe there's some reasoning behind it. If Cubans decide to break this law, they could face the risk of doing some jail time and having their automobile towed. In Cuba, you need a government-issued taxi license, unlike here in America, where you can basically drive wherever you want to. But since most cars are actually state-owned and not privately owned, the odds of this happening aren't too great. It would be considered what they coin as a licked enrichment. Maybe they're worried that the Cuban in the car will tell the passenger too many secrets about Cuba? Who knows? Number 9. Can't import certain communication devices. If you don't have authorization, you cannot bring wireless microphones, walkie-talkies, satellite communication devices, and other things of that manner. The law states that a person who wishes to import wireless microphones, walkie-talkies, and satellite communication devices needs a specific authorization to introduce the equipment into the country, and also a license for installation, exploitation, and functioning. Both of those must be issued by the Supervision and Control Agency of the Ministry of Information and Communications. Basically, you can't just go to Cuba and start doing your own reporting and interviewing people on the street. This law makes it much harder for people to try to make a documentary about the country. The walkie-talkies or satellite communication devices might be able to pick up on some police frequencies or something of that nature. That's only a hypothesis. The law also suggests that just because you ask for permission certainly doesn't mean you'll get it, so don't get your hopes up. Number 8. Can't live in Havana. Can you imagine there being a law in the US that stated that we weren't allowed to live in Washington, D.C. unless the government actually gave us permission? Sure, there are plenty of other good cities where you could live, but it would seem rather restrictive to us. So in Cuba, people who live in Santiago couldn't legally live in Havana unless he or she has a special permit that grants them access. It's what's known as a Decree Law 217/1997. It states that people who live in another province of Cuba cannot live in the capital city without transitory documents, which is issued by the Ministry of Interior. Some feel as though this law violates the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states that everyone has the right of freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state. But that's not the case for Cuba. They also aren't allowed to travel abroad without government permission, which would certainly make it difficult to be a digital nomad if you were born in Cuba. This law should at least keep Havana from becoming overpopulated, as we've seen a huge trend in megacities within the past few decades, where everyone abandoned smaller towns. Whatever the case may be, they still get free healthcare, which is more than you can say about some countries. Number 7. Cable TV. Say it isn't so. Can Cuba really ban cable TV to their people? It sure seems like it. The only international TV that people are allowed to watch in their homes comes from a social network known as Telecable, who caters to pretty much everyone besides the people of Cuba. The people that get to watch this TV includes foreign diplomats, foreign companies, or foreigners who are residing in Cuba. This will allow them to access channels like HBO, ESPN, Discovery Channel, CNN, ABC, and etc. But for the Cuban citizens of the country, all they get to watch is TV provided by the government. This is known as Telesur, which is a Latin socialist channel. We imagine the cartoons aren't quite as funny over there, but who knows? Maybe communist Cuba has more of a sense of humor than we like to think? Number 6. Internet access. Similar to cable TV in a sense, Cubans can't access the internet from their homes or from their cell phones. According to the sole internet provider of Cuba, offering internet to the private homes of Cubans is not allowed. It's just not a service that's provided to your everyday Cuban. This is something that Americans need to know about, as our internet seems to be censored more and more every day by people with socialist beliefs. If censorship continues to get worse, and tech companies continue to have a say in what goes online and what doesn't, they may eventually decide who gets the internet and who doesn't. Could you imagine living in a world where the internet was just a privilege and not a birthright? In any case, the internet is typically provided for business and for foreigners residing in the country. It's almost like they have more rights than Cuban-born citizens. Only minuscule 1.67% of the population has internet access, meaning that they probably can't watch American Eye videos. Will someone please bring them democracy ASAP? Number 5. No sailboating. Another restriction that seems rather defeating to native-born Cubans is that they can't get on boats or ships that are part of the tourist package. That means that no matter where native Cubans live, he or she may not be sold a tourist package that includes a catamaran or a yacht. This privilege is exclusive. Is it possible that they don't want Cubans mingling around with other people who have a lifestyle different than those in Cuba? It's not necessarily a law that's written in stone, but government-owned travel agencies have admitted that this is the case. They simply won't sell the travel packages that involve these types of boats, and they're for the exclusive enjoyment of foreign travelers. Number 4. You can't criticize Castro. Many of us around the world have limited free speech, but we can definitely go on Twitter and make fun of our president without having to worry about the CIA or the FBI showing up at our front door. One rule in Cuba is clear though: you cannot criticize the Castro regime or the Cuban Communist Party. This would be the ultimate sin against Cuba after everything Castro did for them. Especially during the beginning of the Cuban Revolution, speaking out against a dictator could have easily gotten you standing in front of a firing squad. Castro may have started out as a good guy who seemingly cared for the people at first, but it wouldn't be long until he would turn into a power-hungry despot. Number 3. No public demonstrations. Typically, when people feel as though they're being oppressed, they might gather together in the streets and try to make a statement to the government. You've seen this happen quite often in 2019, especially in places like France and Hong Kong. But in the country of Cuba, you're just gonna have to suck it up. That's because large organized protests are actually a felony. The law states that he who participates in a meeting or demonstrations celebrated without respecting the dispositions that regulate this right is committing a felony against the public order. People can't even protest for their right to protest. This makes it somewhat of an international lawbreaker, since everyone is supposed to have the freedom of peaceful assembly and association. Having to worry about going to prison for more than a year makes you really think twice before you pull out your picket sign. If enough people showed up, they couldn't arrest everyone though, right? Number 2. No private schools allowed. If you're considering the possibility of sending your kid to boarding school in Cuba, you can't. Although it might sound like a good idea so you can have some private time, private or religious schools are banned here. And your kid will be forced to have a proper state-sponsored education full of propaganda. They probably get a full dosage of how America is bad and all that, so they don't decide to leave Cuba. In any case though, Cuba has one of the highest literacy rates in the world, with 99.8% of their population being able to read or write. But before we get to our number 1, we'd like to hear from you guys. Which communist country would you like to travel to and why? There might be more of them out there than you think. Let us know in the comment section for your chance to get featured in an upcoming video. And number 1, don't take photos of the police. You are allowed to bring cameras to Cuba, but you should be pretty careful of what you take a photo of. It's illegal for anyone to take photos of the police or soldiers in Cuba, and it might be more of a serious crime than you think. Cuba has often been the target of espionage by the CIA and other special agents, which makes them more sensitive towards photography. It might seem like you'll be guilty until proven innocent of espionage. You might get away with a candid shot, but at least have some way to prove that you're not actually a spy, or you might be doing some hard time in Cuba.
So what'd you guys think of that video? Be sure to let us know in the comments below and then subscribe for new videos.